With new, gentler scented Clorox disinfecting wipes, clean finally smells as good as it feels. On everything from lamps to ceiling fans. Even on your kid's toy shark. Oh, ouch. Clorox disinfecting wipes. Now available in crisp lemon. Find it on Amazon. Clorox. Clean feels good.
We find Vecna, we end this once and for all, together.
On November 26th.
We have a plan. It's a bit insane. Everyone in?
He knows where we are.
Watch out! Get ready for one last adventure.
We stay true to ourselves. Stay true to our friends, no matter the cost.
Found you. Stranger Things, the final season, begins November 26th, only on Netflix.
Welcome back to Cruising. This is Sarah Gabrielli, and I'm so excited to introduce our guest, Carmen Maria Machado. Carmen is a writer of queer horror essays and short stories, but she's most well known for her memoir, In the Dream House, which came out in 2019 and really took the queer lit world by storm. In it, she brings light to a concept often shied away from: domestic violence and abuse within queer relationships. Writing the memoir, Carmen did a lot of research into this somewhat forgotten history of abuse within the lesbian community, the ways in which it is less visible, and some of the stories that made it into the archives anyway. She spoke about all of this, including her own personal experience, her coming out journey, and writing process. As a huge fan of her writing myself, I absolutely loved chatting with Carmen. Before I'd even hit record, we started yapping about reality TV. Not that Carmen likes it the way that I do, but she has a lot to say about it nonetheless. We eventually landed on this extremely relevant topic of the first season of The Queer Ultimatum, which, particularly in the reunion, showcases some glaring examples of domestic abuse amongst lesbian partners. This is where our recording will pick up in just a moment.
My book came out in 2019, the memoir, and I did an event in Portland where this queer elder was like sitting in the front row. She was like this older butch lesbian. She had a cane, and obviously it was like really exciting to see somebody there. Like, I love obviously meeting older queers. She raised her hand and she's like, it was great to hear you talk about the book. It sounds great. I'm looking forward to reading it. And then she said, I feel like every decade or so we try to have a conversation about domestic violence in the lesbian community, and I really hope it sticks this time. And I went back to my hotel and just cried because it was just so sad, and it made me feel really helpless, I guess, or something. So then when I was watching The Queer Ultimatum, and I'm obviously full of rage, I'm having a lot of feelings about, I'm a Vanessa truther. I think Vanessa's great. I think the rest of y'all are weird. I think Lexi is the worst person who's ever lived. I hate her so much. So I'm already worked up and annoying at parties about The Queer Ultimatum. And then we get to this finale, and I just I was also just crying because I was we're only 6 years out. And not that I'm thinking my book was the thing, whatever. It's just one voice in a million voices. But it was just so wild to have a television show by a major network in what year was that? Was that 2022, 2023? For them just to so casually, just no awareness of any kind of how f***ed up it is to allow that person to be on the reunion with the other person. And the treatment of it is so blasé. And I was just this is outrageous. It is deeply f***ed up. It's extremely homophobic. There was just no bottom to my contempt for Netflix and the people who are putting the show on. And of course, obviously the person in question. But it also just made me so sad. I was God, what does it take to move the needle? And I know that domestic violence has reared its head in heterosexual dating shows as well. I read a little bit about it because I was kind of curious about what is sort of the history of this showing up in dating or romance style reality shows. And it's obviously has, and it's always been a problem. It just made me really sad. I was just yeah, it's how outrageous that we just treat this so casually, and that there's just no awareness on the part of the very wealthy, powerful sort of network or streamer in question, the people running the show, the other people on the show. It just felt so negligent in this deeply horrible up way that I I really struggled with, which like is just crazy because like why am I expecting a show like this to be any better? But I was just like, it just feels like, especially in like this moment of our history where like every queer person in the world is being like hung out to dry. You know, we're just like in this like really deeply troubling place, and just like the negligence about like something as straightforward as like, oh, someone was like throwing shit at me and I had to like leave the house and call the police. And then I felt like, yeah, the conversation about that show was so insane that it like basically got me off of TikTok. Not permanently. I was just like, I actually cannot handle the like smug and weirdly thin discourse about this show that just feels like so outrageous. So anyway, so then I wrote like, 10,000, not 10, I wrote like a ton of essays for my Substack. It was like really, it was the only thing I was doing for like weeks. Like I was just
so
writing
funny.
these essays. This is my thing, is I have this deep pathological problem where like when everybody is wrong, I can't handle it. Like I'm just like, I actually find it so frustrating. And then I get really worked up and then I have to be like, okay, you actually cannot make everybody understand your position. You cannot, like, that's like literally not a power you have, and I have to like really scale it back. I think also the thing about that show that was really hard, and the combination of that show and then being on TikTok and sort of watching the conversation, was that oftentimes I was seeing like young queers. I'm almost 40, so like I don't feel young exactly anymore. I'm definitely of a different generation, and like I was like worried seeing the discourse as it was manifesting among like younger queer people, because it felt like it was missing something really essential, and I like didn't know what to do about it, because I'm like should I make TikTok content? That I like tried one video and I was like, no, this is not for me. Like this is just not.
Are there ways that you felt like the needle was kind of moving? Do you feel like you've seen a sort of shift from the time that the book came out?
I mean, it's so hard to say because the book came out and then COVID happened. So I feel like my own sort of journey with the book was so strained because like writing it was so difficult. And then I had this tour, which was like really intense. And then something COVID happened, and then I had a complete mental breakdown during COVID. So like it's like hard to say. It's like I want to be like, yes. Like I hear from a lot of people who are like, I read your book and realized that I had been in an abusive relationship. I read your book and realized I was in an abusive relationship like at that moment. And I like, you know, so like clearly I know that it's like moved a kind of needle, but I think actually it's so funny because I feel like the queer community feels so small, but it's actually large. I was just sort of thinking about like, I'm trying to think how to say it without sounding like really like an ass. But I was like, yeah, like I was like, I'm curious if like this kind of conversation has like entered into like, I don't even know what you call like the scene gays, like queers. I don't know what you even call that group, but like, you know, like I was like, I'm curious if like are they talking about it like what it is? Like do they, and I like don't know. Like as and of course I couldn't tell because like the show it gave no space for that, obviously.
I wish I had like an answer for you as someone that's very online in queer spaces. How are people thinking about this? And I feel like I've realized that, yeah, the community is huge. Just because like the Brooklyn gays that I know think one way, this is so random, but we just went on an Olivia trip. Do you know? It's
I've heard about Olivia.
Like
yeah,
a lesbian travel company.
Yeah.
And everyone I know is a hairy lesbian. Literally every lesbian that I know does not shave.
Mm-hmm.
And me and my girlfriend were the only hairy lesbians on this 1,500 lesbian trip. And I was like,
so
I don't
funny.
know the queer community at all.
This is so funny you would say this because I literally got into a conversation with it was actually a gay woman slightly older than me at a residency years ago. And this came up and she was like, I have never been with a queer woman who hasn't been like totally shaved. And I was like, I have not been with a queer woman who was not total. Like I was like, I feel like it was like a really crazy conversation because I was like, I literally cannot think of a single person that I have slept with who does not have like underarm hair and or like, and I had the same thought where I was like, wow, the gay community is actually quite large. Like, you know, to me, I'm like all queer women just like don't shave and like whatever, like it's great, whatever. And then I was like, oh wait, actually, same thing. Where I was just like, oh right. There are other like categories of queer people who like live really different lives. And I think this is also what I was thinking when I was watching that show. Because I was just like, oh yeah, this is actually kind of a different like, this is like a different genre of queer. Like it's like, you know, we're actually like kind of in different universes in like most significant ways.
I think it's a more basic version. Like I don't think it's a coincidence that the hairy lesbians were the ones that like got brought for free on the trip.
You know, I think I actually remember one time, like one of the biggest revelations I ever had about queer community and queers in general was the realization that there are like a lot of really basic gay people, like just people who are really basic and normal people, and they happen to be gay, and that's beautiful. I love that. We need them. They're a beautiful part of our community. But like that queer people are really actually quite diverse in all kinds of interesting ways, and that like there are some people who are just like, I would otherwise be like the normiest normal you've ever met in your life, but I happen to be gay, and that's great. And I'm like, okay, like I think it's actually kind of beautiful and interesting. But it was actually like it hit me like a lightning bolt. Like I feel like I thought we were like this very like rarefied thing, and what I was actually experiencing was like this very specific subset of people that like, yeah, I knew that were like in my community that were when I became a writer or like among my readers and among my sort of writing community as well. Like I feel like, but it's like actually that's like quite a narrow, or not a narrow, but it's like it's its own subsection of the queer community that is actually quite large and diverse and has all kinds of interesting like little arms.
So I would think that, yeah, there's continues to be all sorts of different mindsets around queer domestic violence and everywhere, but it's also in every community.
Yeah.
Right?
Right, exactly. It's like, and I think the thing that also blew my mind when I was working on the memoir was I was like, God, I don't think I realized how new relatively the concept of domestic violence was, period. Like giving it language, it's only like, it's not even like 50 years old. Like it's pretty new. No one had like a name for it. And then of course it's like, well, yeah, so if that idea or that concept is so new, then of course like how it applies to like a specific subsection of people who are marginalized and aren't given as much access to like their own history and their own voices, etc. It makes sense that that would be like a thing that is like not quite discussed. So it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I feel like just the realization that like that whole concept was like so new. I was reading a lot of notes and minutes from like I can't remember the name of it anymore, but like the domestic violence organization that like was the first one. And they would have these meetings. And at some point they were like, we cannot have the lesbians talking about this anymore because like it is affecting straight women, and like the lesbians are like distracting from the conversation about straight. And like I talk about this in the memoir like very briefly, but like yeah, they literally said it. The more I read about progressive politics, like I was like, oh, this is like an eternal problem. The umbrella of like progressive politics as a whole is so big, and like there are always going to be these like competing, intersecting identities that are like trying to like make their lives of them and their communities better. And they're going to like butt up against each other in like various ways. That's kind of an eternal problem. Progressive circles are always like throwing certain people under the bus and letting other people kind of run the show. And like for good or for bad, like this is like the eternal struggle of the progressive movement and will probably always be that case forever. But it is interesting to like read about it and realize like, wow, no wonder the language for this is so thin. Like no wonder there is such little discourse about it.
You kind of start the book talking about archives and gaps in archives. Was that part of you wanting to write your story to like fill this need, or was it something that you came to in researching it?
It was kind of both. My whole career, like everything I do is like me being like, God, I want to read this thing, and then it doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, I guess I got to write it. So that's happened to me like multiple times in like different genres. So it's not like that's not a thing that happens all the time. So there was that piece of it where like I literally went looking for memoirs like the one that I eventually wrote, and like I just could not find. Because like there's a lot of memoirs about domestic violence, but not about queer domestic violence. And I found like a few, like I mentioned in the notes in the back of the memoir, like there was like a book of poetry and like a couple of essays and like little things that I was pulling out, but like it was just like not something that had really been like addressed in this sort of head-on way as far as I could tell in sort of the nonfiction space. And so I was like, well, I guess I'm going to do this. And then as I was doing the research, you know, and also like I talk in the book about like even in the beginning of that, when they started trying to like address it in like a legal sense, which we all know the legal system is very like complicated and very racist and very up and like problematic in all kinds of ways. And so like, because we're so used to like this idea of like men are the abusers, women, you know, and so like how do we translate this concept into the queer community? And I talk about how like it was also like deeply racist. There was like a case that I mentioned, and it's like the person writing the paper is a lawyer. So they're just like, this is an interesting case that I had, like, can we talk about it? And basically they're like, I had a client who was abused by a partner or a girlfriend, and the girlfriend was convicted, but I'm pretty sure it's because she was Black. Like, I feel like if she wasn't Black, she wouldn't have been. So she was like, I'm relieved that my client got justice, but also I feel like the outcome was very like determined by the race of the perpetrator. And so like acknowledging just even in that case, it's like that there's just so many intersections of these conflicts. It was a very like dark, weird thing. But so I think when I came out of it, I was just like, well, it's not like I'm writing about something that like has no precedent. Like we've been trying to talk about this, and like all I can do is talk about like my very narrow specific part of it. But the history was like a way of me, like I sort of realized like, oh, I'm just kind of like one more little like cog in this, one more pebble in this hole, or I'm like, I can fill it in as best as I can, but also like the whole time I was writing it, I was like so aware of my own inadequacy. You know, it's like, what am I missing? Like because like I'm not an academic, I'm not a historian. That's like not my background in any way. And so I felt like I was like learning how to like do this kind of research and archival work, and also being aware of that just like there was just so much that I could not possibly know. And I talk about in the back of the book about how like most of what I was finding was like the lesbian community in the United States between these various big days. So it's like even that is like a very narrow subset of like the queer community, as we were just talking about, right? That is like it's so huge and like you're only seeing this little part of it. So I feel like, yeah, I wanted to write it. I knew that this was like a thing that I was kind of going to write about. And also the academic language of Saidiya Hartman, which I talk about in the beginning of the book, writing about this idea of like the violence and the silence of the archives was like so insightful to me. And I didn't realize there was like a formal sort of academic language around this concept. And then once I had that language, I was like, it all kind of like clicked. Do you know what I mean? Like it suddenly all came together. And it's weird because I came to that material fairly late in the process. Like it was like not the first thing that I read. It was like one of the last things I wrote about. Like that introduction was like one of the last parts of the book that I wrote. And so I'm very grateful and lucky that this like really brilliant person had like kind of put this language to this idea, and that it sort of confirmed or like gave this like sort of label to this thing that I had been thinking about, which is like, wow, there's just so much that's unspoken. I think this is even true. Like even people, you know, like you have family histories and like people die and then you're like, what happened here? And everyone's like, I don't know. The person who knows is dead. And like, we'll never, you know, if it wasn't written down or wasn't told to anybody, like, how do we possibly know that like there are always going to be these gaps? And like part of the work that we have to do is trying to like fill in these spaces as best we can.
Mm-hmm. What you were reminding me of is one of your quotes that I wrote down, which was like, people in history, they're like parallels between the way that they talk about like queer relationship and queer domestic violence. I think you cited a case where it's like, oh, well, this affair couldn't have happened because they couldn't have actually had sex.
Oh, right. Yeah. So there was this like case in like, I want to say England, where basically these two school teachers were like on trial for like having sex with each other. Like this was the thing they were on trial for. And they were basically found whatever the equivalent of like innocent is, or like not guilty, I guess. And the explanation that was given was like, well, there's no penetrative organ, so there's no orgasm, so there's no sex, so they can't have had sex. It's not said exactly like that, but that's like fundamentally what it said. So yeah, like, so also the other thing about queer women, and this is like so interesting because it's actually a place that like queer men and queer women sort of deviate from each other in this historical sense, is that like queer men, cis men, like their sexuality was there's a lot of legal language around it. Like we had this idea of it, and queer women, it was like more, queer cis women, it was more ambiguous because it was like, well, they can't even, you know, so like how could they, it was like so funny. So like a lot of queer men like really flew under the radar even in these like marriages essentially, or these like equivalent of these marriages, because like we just didn't think. And like I feel like now like the way people have sort of like memified this idea is this idea where people are like, oh, they were just friends, right? Just like if you look through the historical record, there's all these like queer women who like are clearly in relationships, but the historical record doesn't know how to like put language to that. So they're just like, you know, whatever. They're good buddies. But like that is true. And that like queer women just had this like different way of like operating in the world historically. Then the wrinkle becomes like, again, this like kind of invisibility is like kind of a blessing and a curse. Cause it's like a blessing if you're like, I want to be gay. It's like 1890, but I don't want to be, you know, and like that's actually kind of good. But then on the other hand, there's ways in which this silence and this kind of invisibility works against you. So it's like this kind of interesting sort of double-edged sword.
I've heard you talk about in multiple interviews, I think, the case that like stuck with you the most was of Deborah Reed in ways. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, so essentially there was this, and of course it's been so long since I've written the memoir that like a lot of the details of the names of these things have like kind of escaped my brain. But there was these women who were all in prison, I think in Massachusetts, who were like, we're here because we killed our abusers. And all the women were straight except for this woman, Deborah. So she was the only lesbian. So there was actually a award-winning film, like documentary made about these women. And Deborah appears like super briefly. And like the documentary does not seem to know what to do with it. The fact that her abuser was a woman and that like she killed an abusive partner. And so this case was like fairly well known. This documentary existed. But like Deborah was like this weird little side note. Like they didn't ever quite know what to do with her, and she was always kind of appearing on the edges. And I only ever really found more about her when I was reading specifically about this idea of like lesbian domestic violence, where like various like, you know, queer academics that sort of like put Deborah's story into this like larger framework. But like she just in general was kind of ignored, just because I think people just didn't know what to do. They were like, we have this idea about domestic violence. It's so clear. We are able to talk with these women in a certain way, but like this one woman, we just simply cannot. We don't have language for it, or we don't know how to like talk about it easily, and so we're just gonna kind of ignore it. And she just had like everything I did find about her. She just was a really like, and I don't even know if she's with us still. I don't know, but like everything she wrote was just like so beautiful and heartbreaking. And like she wrote about how like when she got out of prison, like all she wanted was like a little room with a little door that she could like close and lock, and like a little doorknob that she could turn. And like I found everything that she wrote like really evocative and really beautiful and really heartbreaking. And I just kept thinking about her. Every time I read about her, she just kind of existed like in the back of my brain the whole time I was writing. It was this really like, because I don't write, this is my first like book of nonfiction, and like I typically am like a fiction writer, so like this direct kind of like almost like interface with like a subject or a real person is like not common for me. So it was like very interesting to just like have this like little voice speaking and like saying all these insightful things, and just knowing that like no one really cared, or not many people cared about this thing that she'd gone through.
And she's
so
Black,
sad.
right?
She is Black, yes.
And
yeah.
wasn't she like the only one that didn't get clemency or something?
I think there were 2 that did not get, again, it's been a minute since I'd have to like look back at my notes, but like I think it was 2 did not get. So a lot of them were pardoned essentially, or got clemency, and Deborah did not. I think there was one other woman that did not as well, but I don't remember the circumstances of her situation. So she did eventually get out, but like it, you know, she like served her whole sentence. It just kind of breaks my heart. Like when I was researching the historical material, I was like, oh, this would be like a little break from like the personal material, and it was like just as hard, like in different ways, because it was just digging through this archive of like sadness and like just a lot of people being like, no one believed me. I said this, and no, everyone was like, that's not possible, or like I couldn't tell anybody, or I mean, there was this one woman I wrote about who, you know, was like butch, and she talked about her like femme lover who like stoned her, like threw stones at her. And also just thinking a lot about how like women of color also like are not getting the justice they deserve, and also like non-femme queers are also like just in this weird, because like we think of them as quote unquote masculine and men, and we think of men as the abuse. So like it's like this is like this series of like intersecting prejudices, and the result of one of them is like mask lesbians or butch lesbians, masculine of center lesbians are not acknowledged. And I know people for who have gone through this, where it's like they have been like a masculine center person who've been abused, and like it's hard to get people to understand that or explain it, because there's like this mask. So like it's weird, because I feel like when you write a book like that, it felt like I was trying to like catch something like in amber, and what's been so wild is the way the tendrils of it have just gone in every direction. And it's like, again, so like watching, not to bring it back to the queer ultimatum or whatever, but like I was just like, it's crazy to me that like this is like that, like I thought I like contained this somehow in my own life, and that's just wild how just like popping up in these like bizarre places.
You write about maybe in the 80s this conversation starts coming up, and I guess based off of that woman at that book reading or signing that you were talking about is kind of saying like this has continued to happen, where this conversation has come up and not stuck. But what did you learn about like a sort of movement towards acknowledging this?
So essentially, yeah, like the spaces that were being created for domestic violence as like a general category were very homophobic. And so they were kind of like, it's distracting to talk about lesbians because we're trying to focus on like women being abused, heterosexual women being abused by their male partners. There was like this is a split. And so like once that started happening, queer people were kind of trying to do their own. So there were a lot of like queer publications in like the 80s and 90s that like did like issues about domestic violence and like talked about it. So like they were like trying to address it, but like as I mentioned in the book, it was really transphobic. It was really anti-BDSM, this idea of like consensual physical sort of interaction. They considered that sort of like akin to domestic violence. So like even that was very complicated. But yeah, it's like in the same way that like certain kinds of queers were like, who cares about trans people? And then kind of threw them under the bus. Like I feel like there's always been in progressive movements these factions of like more powerful minorities and less powerful minorities, and they make these decisions about like who can we sacrifice for this thing, which is obviously up and misguided.
Like,
but
people won't listen to us if we're including these lesbian.
Exactly. Again, this is like a thing that's like always happened.
Yeah, it's
where, like,
all, it's like racism in the suffragist movement.
Exactly. Literally, I mean, that's like a perfect historical analogy, right? Which is like the white suffragettes being like, we can't add race to this, it's too complicated. And so like putting all the Black women in the movement, like in the back of the parade, lesbians confuse the issue, essentially. There's also this phenomenon in this sort of conversation, which is that like, we need to have good PR. Like, we need to be presenting like a unified, good front. And like the dialogue about domestic violence in the community is like works against that aim. And so it sucks because it's like, because the world is homophobic, we don't get to have the conversation we need to have about this thing within our own community. And this is not just true. This is like true of like a lot of communities. Like, and actually when I was touring the book and talking to people, I would hear from other people who belong to other communities that I don't belong to saying like, we also have this problem in our community where like, we want to talk about this particular subject, but because of racism, because of other things, we don't get to talk about it because like the risk is that we're like bad PR for our community. And like, it's a really real situation. So it's been that way for a long time. And I feel like it's still an issue. So like, and it's like hard because it's like, this is because of homophobia. This is because we live in a world that is like trying to kill us all the time, that we don't get to actually talk earnestly and honestly about this thing that is going on that we need to like address within ourselves. It's like the homophobia just generates this. It like helps the abuse. Like it makes it more possible and more palatable and more, helps it along, which is it's not surprising, but it's also like horrible.
I feel like the quote that like hit me the hardest from you is if I were to have known, like, would that have made me smarter or dumber? Like, would that have made me dumber because I would have just done the same exact thing? Do you think that the lack of conversation like plays a huge part in just our vulnerability in getting into these situations?
I mean, this is another way that like I was talking earlier about like my relative age. I'm almost 40. I'm like of a different generation than like sort of the queer people in their 20s now are like kind of just a different, they grew up in a different world. And so like when I was young, like I mentioned in the memoir, how like I had this huge crush on this like female friend of mine growing up, but I didn't know that's what it was. I was like, oh, it's normal. I want to kiss your friend all over her freckles. That's like a normal feeling that people just have. Because not because I didn't know it. It's like I knew it. I felt it very deeply, but like I didn't have any language for it. Like I didn't really have like, there was no social media. I didn't have any like language, media, anything I'd seen or read. Like there was just like not, and like, I mean, there were like gay straight alliances when I was a high schooler, but not at my school. So like, it's also just like, where did you live? Like where, if you don't have words for the thing or you don't know what you're looking at, how can you know? And that feels so obvious to say. And I feel like for a while, it felt like really hard to explain, especially to younger people, because it's like, it's so beautiful how like, I mean, oh my God, like we have like young people in our life, like nephews and nieces and friends of children of friends who are queer. They're so young and they're like, I'm not binary, I'm queer, I'm whatever. And I think it is like, I always get so emotional. It's like so beautiful because I'm like, yeah, like you clearly exist. I mean, obviously we are still in a very up time and it's like very hard to be queer, especially trans right now, especially if you're a young person, because like the government is like aligned against you in like every way possible. But also it's so beautiful that like they have the language for it. They can like see it and understand it. And there's some like framework for them. And I think like growing up, it's just like hard to explain when you grow up in that world to grow up to say like, oh yeah, there's also like a version of this world where like you don't have any of this context and you like actually don't know who you are, and your life is about like figuring out who you are, which I guess everyone's life is about figuring out who they are. That's always true, but it's like hard to explain. So this is a way that I feel very old, but also I feel like when I was writing the memoir, I was thinking a lot of this idea of like, you don't know what you don't know until you know it, if you know it. Right? If you come to know it. So it's this very like, I don't know, upsetting and strange thing about being alive.
The amount of times that and again, it's making me realize this is all universal, like the amount of times that I've interviewed someone about a lesbian bar, like an older lesbian who said like before, like I thought I was the only person on the planet that felt like this because of the lack of representation, like just literally not knowing gay people existed. I've heard it over and over again. And it's like, obviously, if you have no framework at all, you are going to think there's something wrong with you, or you're going to like not understand how to address what is going on.
Yeah.
So do you feel like the girl whose freckles you wanted to kiss, was that your first sense of that kind of attraction?
I think so. I mean, I guess I had like a bunch of like kind of intense female friendships, as one does when one is queer and doesn't know it. But I do remember this friend of mine in particular. And what's funny is that she's also queer. She came out as gay later. But like, I feel like I knew. And then like when it's confirmed for me later, I was like, I knew it. On some level, I like understood, But I think that was like the first person that I felt like very strongly about. And it was like that vibe where like the teacher always had to separate us because we wouldn't stop talking to each other. I feel like this is whenever I meet somebody who I end up romantically involved with, it's almost always someone I'm like, we would have been separated if we had been in the same algebra class in middle school or high school, because we would not be able to I feel like I've said this to like multiple people I've dated where I've been like, if we vibe in this way, it means that the teacher would have been like, you need to sit apart from each other because I can't handle this.
So you write about like, it sounds like you personally find your way to religion, right?
Yeah. Like I grew up going to a church. Like I went to this Methodist church, which is like a pretty middle of the road kind of Protestant, whatever. My parents are like not particularly like, they're not conservative and they're not like, I think they're like, they believe in God, but they're not like super religious people. So people are always like, oh, were you religious because like your family was? And I was like, not really. I like fell in with a gang of evangelicals who were at my school because the way I explain it is I'm like, I wanted to feel something. And I think I wanted to have sex, but I didn't know that's what I wanted. So I was like, God, it's like bigger than me. It's this, and I feel like very small in front of it.
You wanted like to be loved.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, I was almost like a self-imposed, very religious teenager for like years. And what's funny is that even at the height of it, or the depths of it, I guess, I was like, guys, I don't think God hates gay people. Because I actually like could not conceive. Like I was like thinking about this God that I feel like I was getting to know in my own way. And I was like, that literally makes no sense to me. Like I actually cannot. So I would go to Bible study, get these huge fights with these other evangelicals. And they also were like, they didn't believe in like evolution. So I would be like, also like couldn't, because my dad's like a scientist. So I was like, couldn't like God have directed, it's so beautiful, right? Like evolution. And they were like, no, God, the earth was created 6,000 years ago in like 6 days or whatever. And I was like, that doesn't feel right to me. But like their fervor, like the intensity with which they approached their faith was so interesting to me. And so I definitely I was like very religious. And like it was not from my family. It was just me. And like I had a really good friend who we both had sort of had our own sort of experiences in our adolescence that we both kind of went towards religion. We also did like Bible study together. Like we would like do these workbooks together. And so it was just like, it was like a big part of my life when I was, like 14 through like 17, 18. And then I got to college and I was like, I like pretty quickly like went away. But like because I was just like, oh, this actually was like a weird thing. And then I got to experience just like real life. And I was like, oh, I didn't need to. That was nice. Whatever. It was like a huge, huge part of my identity for like years and years. And I feel like it's funny because now I'm doing a lot of writing. I'm thinking a lot about, I'm writing this novel. I'm working on this novel that has I'm trying to like come up with a philosophy of like topping and bottoming from a sapphic perspective, because these words obviously mean different things in like the queer lesbian community than they do in the gay male community. And so I've been thinking a lot about this idea, and like the language that I'm finding that I find so interesting is it's language of like mysticism. Like it's language about like the abeyance of will in the face of something big. And to me, it's like feels very religious. Like I'm like, this actually is like probably why this is like the piece of my brain that really wanted to love Jesus and really believed in God is the same part of my brain that's like, I have this way that I want to interact, that I want my body to feel in a certain situation, like this sort of sense of like either like having this sense of power or releasing it entirely, and like the way that dynamic is like, but yeah, that feels like very religious to me. It's very holy, and like all the language I'm finding is all about mysticism and this idea of like the abeyance of will and things like that. So like I feel like that has just been like a thing I've been thinking about a lot. And then I'm like, oh yeah, this is the part of me that actually wanted to be that was really religious when I was a teenager. Like that's the part of my brain that is this way. And so I haven't actually lost it. It's just changed forms, essentially.
Yeah, that is another thing that came up for me in realizing how big the queer community is like this whole culture of like women really identifying as tops and bottoms.
Wait, is that not universal? Is that is that what you're saying? Is that's not a universal thing? Like there are people who just like don't?
In a like strict way in the bedroom. Does that feel universal to you? I think then we're realizing we're in maybe two different. Like that you would feel very much in this one role and feel very like this is what I do in the bedroom.
Oh, it's not so much that I think it's like people are like, I am this or I am this.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I've met people who are like, I'm really fluid or I prefer that. I can imagine there are people for whom this is not actually like a conversation at all. But like no one's ever like bringing this up. But I guess I don't know because I've never like but we're talking about these like very like we are in these our own like little queer bubbles. And I feel like the language about it has changed.
I definitely feel like people talk about it, and I just have always thought about it as this like very fluid thing that it's like, what's your energy?
Right.
Or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And then more recently, I was like sort of seeing someone that was like, I am this way and like I don't do the other thing. And then it was coming to my attention that exists for people and that there are communities of lesbians where that is like a kind of strict thing still, which I wasn't part of.
I guess I've met both. Like I feel like I do meet people for whom it is like a sense, almost like an identity, where it's like I am a bottom or I am a top, and this is like a part of my like a sense of self, or like it exists somewhere and it feels more not rigid. That's negative, but like it's very consistent. And then I think I also meet people who are like, I'm feeling this way recently, or like I'm like this, or like I don't know what I am right now. Let's talk about or whatever. But to me, it was also central to my like I feel like it was just like this just feels like a conversation that always comes up, and it feels like kind of important. And it's been important to me, not in the sense that I'm like I'm this thing and that's what I am, but more like what does it mean to like experience this desire or this sense of orientation within this encounter or within this like relationship or whatever. And I've been thinking about it so much that I'm like writing this whole novel about it, which is crazy. But I also again I've been like looking for writing about it, and like all the writing I'm finding, which has been quite interesting, but it's always gay men. Like I feel like whenever I'm looking for like this sort of language in terms of like academic work, like it's always coming up in the context of gay men, which topping and bottoming has like a sort of more specific kind of granular meaning, less energetic and more. I mean, I guess there's probably exceptions, I'm sure, but like my understanding, it's more about who's doing what role and what thing. And I feel like with lesbian/sapphic people, it feels more energetic and is less about like I don't know, like I feel like people are like you can top and penetrate somebody and you can bottom and penetrate somebody, like both of those things are like possible. And like it actually isn't about the act itself, it's more about like how are we approaching this interaction, which I think is just like so fucking interesting. And like I think that's why I've just been thinking about it like nonstop.
I feel the same way. I've always thought of it as energetic, not necessarily who's penetrating who.
Right.
And I've just entered into conversations recently of people being like, but who is wearing the strap?
That's so see, I mean, like, and whatever. Everybody has their thing. And like everybody, like whatever. You want what you want and you are who you are. And like, but I think for me, I find that conversation about the energy of it way more interesting than like the literal sort of like granular breaking down of like what thing goes where and like who does the what role. Cause I'm like, I don't know. I feel like the beauty, it's so funny. This is so woo-woo and so silly, but like I feel like when I'm writing, this is why I don't outline things, because I feel like it's overdetermined and like you go into it and you're like, oh, now I've got to write this section. Whereas to me, writing is about this like what's on the page today and like what is the thing that I'm encountering in this moment. And to me, sex feels the same way, where it's like it's not like I am this thing or like here's the thing I wanted, but it's like what's happening right now? Like what's the vibe in this moment? And to me that feels like just more interesting. But that's me. Like I get that it's like just me as a person and not like everybody. But all those language that I'm finding around it that I'm thinking about is always about religion or God or something larger than you and your submission to it or the opposite. Like it's just, and to me that is like that's where all that energy went for me. It's like into this other thing. So I've been thinking about religion more recently than in years, because I've been thinking about this exact question. So
you kind of like move on from that in college, and is that where you get a clearer understanding of your queerness? Like how did that happen for you?
I mean, I had this really dear friend in college, Kit, I met Kit and Kit was like, I'm bisexual. And I instantly recognized in Kit what was inside of me, like instantly. Like I was like I knew I was like, I think I'm queer in some capacity, but then like I met Kit and I was like, whoa, whatever Kit's putting down, I'm picking up. Like this is, and we were like we're dear friends. And it was like, I just recognized it because she was acting in a way that felt familiar. I was like, oh, feels right. And so then I was like, okay, I guess I'm bisexual. And it's funny because I've changed. I've gone from like bisexual to queer. I do say lesbian, but technically I am bisexual, even though I have not. I, generally speaking, just sort of don't interact with cis men like ever. I try to avoid it. But yeah, so I was like in college sort of realizing I was queer. But I was like a late bloomer. Like I didn't have sex until I was like right at the end of college. And I wasn't, and even then, like my first couple of relationships were with men. And I actually had this problem where I like went to the Bay Area, and this would have been in like 2008. And I was like, I really want to have a girlfriend. I really want to. So I was like really excited. I was like, I'm going to go. It's just going to be gay. And then every time I went on a date, they were like, you're bisexual? Ew. And like just that was the end of the conversation. And so I was like driven to the arms of like tech bros. So I like dated a bunch of like tech guys, and it was like, whatever, it was fine. And then I had my heart broken, and then I went to grad school. So like, I feel like I was kind of like figuring myself out, figuring out who I was as like a sexual creature, and was also trying to sort of navigate these like dynamics of queer politics I didn't fully understand. And like it was consistent. It happened so many times that eventually I was like, I guess I'll just start dating men because like I don't know what to do about this. And I was like, do I lie? Do I say I'm not? But then like also at that point I had only really had a couple of like encounters with like sexual encounters with women. And so I also felt like I don't want to lie and be like, I'm, you know, what. So I was just like in this place of like trying to figure out like who I was and what I was exactly. But because I was hitting this wall, I was like, well, I guess I'll just, I don't know, just date men. So I dated men for like a while because I was just, and confused the shit out of my parents because I told them I was bisexual, and they were like, well, you've had a lot of boyfriends. And I was like, don't read into it. Seriously, don't read into it. So anyway, and it wasn't until I went to grad school that I had my first girlfriend.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies just to see if you could save some cash? Well, Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states. The holidays are approaching, and everyone knows that this time of year, the sooner you can get things done, the better. For both shoppers and businesses, the best time to score great deals during the holidays is during that Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend. And if you have your own business, whether you've been around the block a few times or this is your first year going through the holiday sale rush, the most important thing you can have is a platform that can handle everything that's about to be thrown at you. This is a crucial time for your business and your customers. And with Shopify, you can be sure that your tools and platform are ready for anything that comes your way. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names to entrepreneurs who will be participating in their first Black Friday, Cyber Monday this year. With everything else going on, you probably don't have time to spend hours poring over every little detail in your online store. That's why Shopify's thousands of templates and tools help you streamline website creation and make sure that your site isn't just aesthetically pleasing, but functional and easy to use. Shopify's expedited checkout, Shop Pay, saves customer information and reduces hassle. And the best part is that it's been proven to boost conversions, meaning you'll see less abandoned carts and more profits. You can also stress less knowing that Shopify's award-winning customer support team is on standby 24/7 to help with any issues that arise, allowing you to get back to your business as fast as possible. This Black Friday, join the thousands of new entrepreneurs hearing for the first time with Shopify. Sign up for your free trial today at shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. and make this Black Friday one to remember.
Kraft Mac and Cheese is the best thing ever. It's even better than pop music. You look just as natural enjoying us at age 13 as you do 55. Kraft Mac and Cheese. Best thing ever.
This episode is brought to you by McAfee. Swimsuit, passport, phone, with VPN activated.
VPN?
Cell phone service is going to be spotty on vacation, so we'll be using public Wi-Fi.
Sounds sketchy.
Exactly. The networks can leave your personal info, like credit card numbers, exposed to hackers.
McAfee's secure VPN lets you browse and bank safely from wherever, whenever. Learn more at McAfee.com/online protection.
I think it is not uncommon, and I think it was true of this relationship, for like a person who is capable of abuse or is someone who that is like sort of their default mode, gravitates towards people who have less experience in certain ways. And so like a lot of and like I don't want to like talk too much about her because like her, but like I think that there was something interesting about me that like even though I wasn't like it was like I had sexual encounters, it was like I'd had relationships, but like I had never had a girlfriend. So like I feel like there were a lot of times like in the relationship where she would say like, well, you don't know about this because you never had a girlfriend before. Like this is just how it is. It's different in these ways. And I had no reason not to believe her because like I didn't know.
In the face of conflict, it was like, you don't get it.
Yeah, like I think she would say we'd have these horrible fights that would go on for like days, and I'd be like dehydrated from crying, like just like such a mess. And she would be like, you're not used to this because she had like many girlfriends. So she was like, you're not used to this because you've been dating men and men suck, but like women are passionate. This is like how it is. This is what it is to date a woman. And like I had like literally no way of knowing that was not true because like I just didn't have any context. Again, this is like why context and stories and like this is why it's so important, is because like I was like, I have no reason to believe that that's not true. And I also like I talk about in the memoir, but like, I grew up, my dad is half Cuban. I grew up with a lot of like weird sort of machismo, like a lot of like weird gender sort of stuff. And a thing my dad used to say that I had really, I think, internalized in a way that I did not fully understand was like, men are very logical and women are all emotions and feelings. And of course, that's like a up, insanely gender essentialist way of speaking and is not true and is like very complicated. But like, that sort of like all came together. Like I was like, oh, I guess this is like, right, if women are like I was just like connecting all these like really up things that I'd been told in my life. And so it took me a long time to like kind of untangle myself from these ideas. And I do think that like the fact that I'd never really had a significant relationship with a woman of any kind like did not make it easier because I just like didn't know that wasn't true. And was being told that was normal.
Was there also part of it for you of like wanting this kind of relationship so badly, like feeling like you finally got this?
I mean, it felt so different than every relationship I'd ever had. It felt so passionate and vibrant and like sexually excited. Like it was everything I wanted it to be in the beginning. And I remember having that feeling of like, oh, this is what all that heartbreak was like leading towards. Like all of the like shit that I dealt with before, this is like the beautiful culmination of like my persistence and my, because it was so like sexually exciting, so passionate in the beginning. So it was good in the beginning, as it always is, And so it just felt like this is the thing. This is what I've been looking for. And then I remember like her sort of, saying things to me like, oh, this is just how it is. And I was like, wow, this is like, so, I don't know. Anyway, this is exhausting. I don't know who does this all the time. And of course, realizing later this is like not normal and like not, but I did not know that because I was like 24, I was like so little and like a late bloomer and like so like I didn't know. Which just feels so crazy to say out loud because it's like, obviously this is not normal. But like, I really just was like, okay, I guess this is just what it's like to be a lesbian. That's so intense. It's like a really intense way to be. Something that I talk about in the book that was a kind of a revelation that I was having while I was writing it. I've been fat for like, not my whole life, but like most of my life, like since I was a teenager. And like, there were always these things I was receiving, like messages about attractiveness and about like who would want me or like what. And so I feel like I was always like in this very weird place because I was like very interested in sex. Like once I sort of shed a lot of the religious stuff, I was like, oh, this is like a thing that I actually am really interested in and like want to pursue in this very active way. I had also kind of gotten these messages about like my value and like who would want me and why. And so there was always this dynamic that I struggled with, which was like when someone that I found very attractive also liked me, I was like suspicious, or I was like, there's like an unreality to it that I didn't fully understand. And so I feel like with this person, it was like I was so attracted to her and she was so attracted to me. And it was so like I was like I didn't even know if I could trust it or not. Like it was like, but then it seemed real. So then I was like, oh my God, like I have like hit the jackpot where like someone that I think is so attractive and I have such a good chemistry with like also feels this way about me. And part of that because I've been told my entire life that like that would be very rare if not impossible. And so it made me feel like grateful. Which is like a f***ed up thing to say. And like, you know, if someone told that to me, if like a young person in their 20s was saying this to me, I'd be like, get your head on straight. What are you talking about? That's terrible. But like, I just didn't know. Like, I just didn't, you know, and I was sort of like, well, if this is how it is, if the price of me being with someone is that like, these are the reality of the relationship, like I can do that because I like being gay and I like, you know, I love this person and I'm very attracted to this person. And so I think ultimately there was always just this like way in which the fact that I'm told that like my value as a fat person was like less. And now I'm like being fat is hot and like I love fat people and like I love my body and I love other like I feel like it's like now I like get it. But like at the time I was just like I have to be like so grateful for what I can get. And this is like a very rare. And I really believed like in my head, like once we broke up, I was like, I'm never going to have sex again. Not because I didn't want to, because I was like, no one will ever, this will never happen again. Like this sort of beautiful intersection of like someone that I really desire also desires me in this way.
Can you talk a little bit about the situation when you like came together with the woman in the dream house?
Oh, sure. So when I met my abusive ex, she was dating somebody already and they were long distance. And what I was told was that, oh, we're in this like open relationship. We can have this thing. And I was like, amazing. So like we were just having this like sort of in the beginning kind of casual or not relationship thing, but just a sort of like casual thing. And then eventually she's like, I love you. I want to make this work. But like, that's not the agreement I have with my partner. So like, I was getting this sort of story from this angle. And it wasn't until after we broke up and I connected with the ex who they had broken up like in the middle of like this relationship that I'd had. And this person was like, oh, we were never open. Like she was just cheating on me. And there was like this actual, like it was just like, just so, as a poly person, I heard that's very outrageous. Like I'm like, it's actually so offensive and so up. Like I really hate it. And it is just such bad PR. I really, really hate it. So like I was in this weird situation where like, then I realized that I had been the other woman and I didn't even realize it. And so we had sort of been like manipulated into this sort of poly situation in this very like weird way. And then I became very good friends with the ex and then we dated and then we got married. So I was with Val for a decade and they're a beloved friend. We're still quite close. And now Val has a beautiful kid and is living in a different city and we are really good friends and it's actually really lovely. But it was really cool, like this like good thing, this beautiful thing kind of came out of this really up situation where we were both just being like over by the same person.
Yeah. I just imagine that it's like so cathartic to be able to then be with someone that understands every nuance. Like you're going around having to like explain to people what happened to you and this person is just like, you can just be in it together. Yeah.
Yeah, because we were just like, oh, wow, do you remember this thing? Or like we were constantly saying, like, do you remember this thing? Here was my perspective of this event that happened that we both witnessed. And it was like, actually, it was very cathartic. It was really helpful to have somebody, because like, you know, in the beginning, especially when I was trying to explain to people like just did not understand. And it was really helpful to somebody be like, oh, not only do I understand, I like know exactly what you're talking about. Like this thing that happened, like I literally can like speak to it and speak to my own experience. And so it was like actually really lovely just to have someone to just like talk to. That was like the beginning. And then eventually we were like, oh, we actually had this like our own chemistry, our own sort of dynamic. And it was kind of, I mean, it was amazing. And like, it's true. It's so weird because like the thing about memoir that's so strange is that like when you write a memoir or any book of nonfiction, but especially memoir where you're writing about your own life and your own past, it's not just about like a moment in your life. It's also about who you were when you wrote the book and how that intersects with that moment in the past. So like that book is like me in my early 30s, married to my now ex-wife, thinking about this relationship and like there's a very specific sort of moment that it's capturing. And so it's interesting because people are always like, when people find out that we're divorced and I have a new partner, even though like, I mean, it was, you know, sad and hard. And also we still like love and care about each other. And it's like our relationship just changed. And like, that happens. And I love, actually, one of the reasons I love being queer and I love queer people is that like how many people I know are like good friends with their exes and like just have like a very good sort of dynamic with people they used to be in romantic relationships with. And so, yeah, so it feels like we got to have this like really beautiful thing. People get really like disappointed. They're like, aw. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, it's not bad. Like, it's, you know, it's like, it was sad and hard and like whatever. And now it's, we each have this like thing that we want. And like, that's really beautiful and really, and so, yeah, like the memoir, it's a little like weird to be like, yeah, like cemented in time is this like thing that I, you know, being like, oh, this is like from my perspective from this moment, this is what it looks like. And, you know, if that book, maybe I'll do like an anniversary edition like in the future and I'll write like an introduction and talk about like the sort of the weirdness of this. Cause yeah, it is like a specific thing where it's like you're engaging with like who you were at the moment you wrote the book with the person that you were when the events of the book happened. And that's like a very specific intersection. Like if I wrote that book again now, I'd have I mean, it would be similar in a lot of ways, but I would have like a little different perspective on certain things because I'm a different person than I was when I wrote it.
So for anyone that hasn't read the book, you use I and you, second and first person. And so then the I is not even you right now. The I is you in your 30s reflecting on it, still with your ex. And the you is like this person that was very much inside this abusive relationship, which is so effective. And so like it just sucks you into like especially the you passages as a reader.
Yeah, and I think people like understand the you part. Like they're like, oh, I get that like you're speaking to this like old self. But I'm like, yeah, but even you're right. Like even the I never actually heard anyone say it quite that crisply before, but it's true. It's like, yeah, the I is also this like almost like in amber, like this version of me that is like speaking, but like that's not the me speaking in this microphone right now. That's like a different kind of a different person. And this is why I find nonfiction so stressful, because it's like it is this like really shifting, like the way that time functions and the way that memory works.
There is something you describe having experienced a conflict and kind of like sitting in that and then telling yourself, I'm going to remember this. Like, I'm not going to forget what this felt like or what this means. And then it's sort of implied that like you do the next day. And so I want to hear about that because I feel like that's like a really sort of important aspect for people to think about that might be in these situations. But also it almost feels like because of the way things ended, you don't remember how you felt and then you leave. Like there's never this sort of reckoning of like, actually, I'm not going to do this anymore. Well, there is, but it's well after you've broken up.
Yeah.
It's like once you have the perspective, and it's kind of this idea of being so in it that you like can't think clearly.
Yeah, it's so funny you say this because I very recently, like in the last couple of months, was like looking for a certain file in like, I save everything. My folders are like, oh my, you know, I just have like a lot of stuff on my computer. And I was digging through looking for something completely unrelated. And I found this document. It was half written. I had written it the first time we broke up. And it was like, here's why you should not get back together with this person. And it's like a list. It's like, remember when she did this. Remember when this happened. Remember when this happened. Remember how you read about this thing and it's just like this. And it's like me. And then like the list like ends just like in the middle of a sentence. And like clearly I had like been writing it and then stopped. And like we took us like multiple times to like fully break up because it was just like I kept kind of coming back into it and coming out of it. And it was just so funny because I was like, yeah, like it's weird how you have this kind of clarity. And for me, the thing that was the most helpful, and having now being much older and having had friends and people I know who've gone through this, there's this thing that happens where when you are in a situation where something about how you talk about the situation is like being limited in some way, there will be these moments of like utter clarity where you like surface to the top, to the out of the ocean, and you're like, and you look at like whoever's closest to you and you're like, help me, here's what is happening, A, B, C. And and then you were like, go back under. And then the next time you talk, they're like, oh, everything. I'm like, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Like, I'm okay. It was a misunderstanding. I didn't, you know. And like, this happens constantly. And I've now like recognized it so clearly because I went through it and then I've seen it. And I was just very lucky that like the first time I went through it, like I had good friends who like heard me talk about it and were like, what the f-? And then when I got back together with her, they were like, how you doing? And they were like really, so they were like aware that like then they could like see the thing. And so I feel like the sort of the way that you both like have that moment of clarity, express it really clearly, and then are like, it's fine. Because like to yourself, you can justify it. But then like when there's other people who have heard this, if you're very lucky, there are people who are like, okay, I kind of see what's going on now, and I'm just going to like be your friend as best as I can while you're sort of going through this like very difficult thing. And so, yeah, it's like there's so much of writing that book was like remembering things that I told myself that I would remember, or me encountering things that I had written that I'd forgotten about, that like I had written down at the time. And then I like found these documents or found like things that I had written to myself and been like, oh, thank God I wrote this down. Cause like, I feel like my brain actually did send it away, but like I can, now that I've read it again, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this really clearly. So like, it's also just a way of thinking about memory. And this is what all memoir is. It's like, you're just sort of resurrecting these like things. And if you're very lucky, you have witnesses, or you have things that you wrote at the time, or you do remember something really clearly. There's always this idea that like there are things that your brain just sends away, and there are ways that your brain tries to protect you in good and bad ways, and there are ways in which you can really like get sucked back into things. And I was definitely that person. Like I didn't want to believe. Like I wanted it to be okay. I wanted to make it work. Like if I could have one wish, I would have been like, I want this just to be normal and fine, and I don't want this to be like a nightmare anymore. Like I love this person. I want to make this work. And it took a little bit of distance to realize like actually how in it I was. But I think that's like normal. Like I don't think that's like unusual at all. I think that's like quite normal.
No, yeah, definitely. It's like the definition of the cycle of abuse, but also it's scary to think about because basically your relationship ends kind of the same way that it starts, which is that she meets someone else, and that's kind of how she had disentangled from your ex-wife. But it's like, what would have happened? I mean, I want to read that version of the book that's like you somehow pulling yourself away in this like huge act of bravery and clarity. Yeah, like what do you think would have happened if that hadn't happened?
I don't know. And I think I guess less now because it's been so long, but for a while this was like a thing that I thought about a lot, because I was like, in a way I was so lucky. And like the sad thing about it is it's like, how can I have gone through everything I went through and been like, we can make this work? And then the minute she was like, oh, I've been sleeping with this person for months, like, and did not tell you and have been like lying to you. That was like the socially acceptable script for me to be like, okay, this is done. We're done with this. And I actually even forgave her one time, and then I was like, okay, if you're not gonna see her anymore, and then immediately she starts like, it was so absurd and so silly, and like just in some ways it was just like early 20s nonsense, just like so on the nose, kind of sinister villain shit. But like it also was like the thing that gave me permission to leave and to like hold the line. So like then I write about in the book, like a few weeks or months later, I was like in the gym. A friend and I got really into CrossFit for 6 months because I was really strong for like 6 months because I was like, I need to focus my energy on something else. And so a friend and I came out of the gym and I like got my phone out of the locker, and she had called me like a bunch of times. There were all these like really crazy voicemails, and I was like, I suspect that her and this other person have broken up, like that, because at that point I had enough distance to like kind of see it. And I reached out to this other woman and was totally correct that they had just broken up like that morning. And she'd been like, I need you back. Like, I love you. I made a mistake, whatever. So again, like it's so like embarrassing to say it out loud because it's so silly. And if any person said this to me, I would be like, girl, I have like thoughts and opinions about what you should do. And like, but like at the time I was just so, it like really did take this like very clear cut thing with like a very specific kind of script, AKA being cheated on, which, of all the things she did, that was like the least bad. Like that was,
Truly.
it's like, but and like in retrospect, it's like, who gives a shit? Like, why did that matter when nothing else mattered? But like at the time, like that was the thing that actually allowed me to go. So I don't know what would have happened otherwise. I mean, maybe I hope eventually I would have figured it out, but I don't know. And it's actually this is one of the things that really freaked me out when I was writing the book. I was like, I feel like I can also imagine like other versions of my life where like we had a kid together, or we got married, or we, like, and I have like a lot of friends who are co-parents with like horrible, horrible people. And it is actually like it's a nightmare. And I actually do have this, like, I was diagnosed with OCD this year. So I have a lot of like very vivid, like anxieties that I get like stuck in these like little cycles of thought that I can't like get out of, or like little pits of thought. And like there was a while where it was literally like, it was almost like it had happened. Like we had a child together, and this person would have been in my life and would have been affecting the life of like another, like a young person for like decades. And it was like a nightmare. I had nightmares about having kids with her, because it was like, it just felt like this thing that would like really bind me to her. And I feel like actually quite grateful that like, I mean, I talk about how like I'm glad, thank God I couldn't get pregnant, thank God we couldn't like just get pregnant organically and accidentally, because like I feel like it could have happened and then I would have been like stuck.
I can say from semi firsthand experience, my girlfriend has 3 kids with her abuser, and it is a nightmare every single day.
Yeah.
She has to communicate with him every single day. It's like insane. It's completely.
I mean, the way that, and like, yeah, I have like a lot of friends who have like had their abusive exes abuse the legal system, abuse CPS, abuse like all these sort of existing systems to like kind of perpetuate the abuse even though the relationship is over. And I can like see it so clearly.
Like how that would have happened.
It's like yes, exactly. It's like it happened. And so like it didn't actually happen, thank God. But like I feel like I see it's like one universe over. Like it's not like it didn't happen. It feels like it was like so close and like it's happening to someone else. To a version of me that's like a few universes over who like made some different choices or like different things happened, you know? And it would just frightens me more than anything else. Because we talked about kids and like she really wanted, so I don't know.
So crazy to think about.
Yeah.
You talk about how in writing, like a place is never just a place. It has more of a character to it. And also separately, you talk about how like essential at least some sort of isolation is to the cycle of abuse. And yeah, I'm curious, is that why the dream house is so centered? Because it's kind of like essential to this happening at all? Or I guess more the question is why the dream house as the center?
The book actually used to be called something really different. I sold it as a book. I called it House in Indiana. And then people were asking me about Indiana constantly. And I was like, I don't want to talk about Indiana. I have no feels of the state of Indiana. Like, who cares? So I was like, I'm going to
still house centered.
Yeah, it's true. It is still house centered. The thing that made that book go from a concept that I a thing I wanted to write about to like the book is me thinking about genre and the Gothic specifically, which is always about like women losing their minds in houses. Like that's, you know, and being isolated in various ways in houses. That is what the genre is. And so I think like the house just felt, and like because in the relationship we spent part of the relationship like I was driving, so this house was also like I didn't live in the house, but it was this like huge part of my psyche because I would like go there or leave there, and it was always especially as the relationship kind of started to come apart and everything got really bad, like really really bad. The house was like this, was kind of terrifying, or it was like a relief to leave it, or it was a relief to be in certain rooms. I just had these like memories that are so clear of like each of the rooms of those house and like things that happen in those rooms. And so like I feel like the house just like it just exists in the space because it was impossible to untangle it. And also I remember like in the beginning of the relationship, because you know in the beginning it was sort of like I was so excited and so happy and so, you know, and I remember just being like so excited to just like, I never like lived with a partner, and like mostly I'd always had roommates or always lived with the family or whoever. And so suddenly I was like, my girlfriend has this house, I get to go spend time in this house, and it just feels like we're just like playing house, and it's like very romantic and very sexy and very fun and like really great. But then of course the house became this like weird thing that like was not what I, you know. And so I think just, and houses are just like really interesting kind of I mean, I find haunted house stories really interesting. I feel like houses are very loaded spaces. I think the idea of the house is so interesting. So like it makes sense that would be like what it kind of centered around. So yeah, the house ended up becoming like, if not a character, like a part of the book that felt like, because again, I'm thinking about the Gothic, about what it feels like to be like losing your mind in a discrete space, and like what it means to be a ghost or to see ghosts or to be the ghost, you know, that's like losing their mind.
What do you mean by the chapter titles? Like each section is like Dream House as.
Yeah, so because I knew I wanted to write this sort of, so there's this Olympian novelist, Raymond Queneau, who wrote this book called Exercises in Style, and it's the same story over and over again, being told in different ways. And so this is like a sort of a structure that has existed, and I was really interested in writing something similar. So like each chapter has its own sort of like organizing principle that is like in genre or narrative in some way. So it's like, you know, as like generationship or as high fantasy or as Gothic or, you know, whatever. I just sort of use that to like organize all the chapters. So I don't know, I tried to write it regular, quote unquote. I tried to write like a more straightforward version, and it just like was not good. It was just like very flat, and I was like, something was missing. I'm just really interested in form and structure, and I think that once the structure, it became this way of me sort of like holding like the gem of the thing in front of me and like turning it from side to side and like looking at the different facets. Like once that happened, I was like, oh, this is actually the way that I want to write this, is like thinking about these elements sort of individually, and then hopefully the whole thing kind of coming together, which is what I did.
Yeah, what was it like writing this? It involved tons and tons of processing on your end. Did it start like that? Did it start as a sort of as a way to express like all of your thoughts?
I mean, it was sort of like a weird, so it sucked ass is the short version of how it felt to write it. It was terrible. It was awful. So I had this first book come out. It was very successful. And so the publisher was like, do you have another book? And I was like, well, weirdly, I do have this like very sketchily written, sort of outlined, very rudimentary first draft, not even a first draft of this like memoir possibly. And they were like, let's look at it. They were like, we'll buy this. And I was like, cool. So I sort of like sold it before I like fully like was reckoning with like what it would mean to like write this entire book. And then I didn't think about it for a while because I was like on tour for this first book because it just went on forever and ever and ever. Eventually, when I started writing it, I was like, wow, this is like really intense. This is like way more intense than I thought it would be. And then I had 6 months of residencies. So I basically spent all summer in Taos, New Mexico. This was 2018. So it's the year after my first book came out. And also I should say that like my first book, like not only was it a huge success, but also like my profile just I was suddenly went from being this like random lady on the street to being like in certain circles, a figure who people recognized, which I also had not adjusted to and really still have not adjusted to in a lot of ways. But so, yeah, so I like started writing it and then I went to these residencies and so I went away. Like I was like not in therapy. I was not near my partner. I was not with my friends. I was just like in the desert and then I was in the woods. I went to like this thing in New Mexico and then I went to this one in upstate New York and was just writing. And I was just like writing all day and all night and like putting myself to sleep by watching horror. I would just watch horror movies to put myself to sleep every night. And then I would get up early and keep writing. And it was just like really intense. It was really hard. I did not do a good job taking care of myself. Like I should have been still in therapy. I should have been much more careful about the way I approached it. But I think that I was pretty cavalier about like my own mental health and my own sort of, because I was like, I can do anything. I'm very good at what I do. And I am very good at what I do. But like it was a really intense thing that I was trying to do. And it was really hard. And I really struggled. I mean, I was like digging up lots of that I hadn't thought about in a long time. It was just like, it was hard. It was really hard. And it didn't help that then like I had to tour the book and so talking about it constantly and then COVID happened. So it was just like I went from just like this really, it was just so intense. And then I was like alone with my thoughts. Not literally alone, but I was like then I was like in my house and I couldn't leave, And so my publisher even said to me, they were like, we could push back the deadline or you can just take longer if you need to. They were really kind. They were like, great. They were like, yeah, if you want more time. And I was like, get this book off of my desk. I was like, no, I don't want more time. I will have it to you by the end of December. And I just like kept going. And then like literally like I had to leave this I was like leaving this place I was staying at Bard because I'd won the Bard Fiction Prize. So I had this like I had this little house up there on the Hudson. And so I had to leave by like a certain date. And so like 2 days before I was like, okay, I've got to finish by this day. And I literally just wrote and then I like sent it in and I was like, all right, I don't want to see this book ever again. But then I had to edit it. Obviously I had to see it many times after that, but I was like ready to just sort of,
Yeah. You write about the afterward of like the relationship, people sort of just being hesitant to like fully believe you. I don't think you said this, but this vibe of like there's two sides to every story and kind of just not being like fully in it with you. And obviously that's so hard. Was there this sense of relief? Like, okay, I got this all down and people can take it or leave it. Like I don't have to keep defending myself. This book is out there.
Yes and no. Like yes in the sense that it like did feel like I had sort of put like a little container around it, which I think was helpful. And I had this idea that like I also like I basically was like I want to write other books and I feel like this thing is like in the way, like this part of my life and I need to like put it somewhere. And so I think that I was like, oh, the memoir will be like the way I do that. And so in some ways it worked, quote unquote, in the sense that I like it did give me like I had kind of creatively attacked it. Like I had like done so through like my practice. I had sort of like addressed this thing, but also in the process had like kicked up a lot of stuff about like what stuff that I had not actually healed from or processed like in the aftermath of that relationship. And so it was like both helpful and not helpful. The book was obviously very well received. I was very anxious because I was like, I don't know if there are people who are like pissed at me for like focusing on this like being like, how dare you? Like, I didn't know. I had no clue what was going to happen. And I think generally speaking, it went pretty well. And then there was a period of time where I was kind of interested in like how people were talking about it. And then I feel like I read a few things where I was like, you know what? I don't actually want to know anymore what people think of this. Because I was just like, I did the thing I was going to do. I wrote the book. I did not die. I'm proud of myself for doing it and writing a good book. Like not just like a book that's true, but also a book that's good, which is like a whole different animal, And I got to say the thing I wanted to say and the way I wanted to say it. And I get to have that part of my conversation. And now, like, for the rest of time, people get to have their part of the conversation with the book. But that has nothing to do with me. You know, one day I'll be dead and, like, people can still have that conversation because, like, that's how art works and literature works. And, you know, people talk to me all the time about the book. Like, I get a lot of messages. People come to me at events. People say, like, you know, and that's like a part of my job. Like, this is like what I wrote this book, and then people want to say stuff about it. And I think that's really beautiful. But also it's like, for me, I'm kind of like, that book just feels like, I'm not a parent, so I feel weird calling it a child, but it's like, you know, at some point you're pregnant with a child and you are sort of in control of what's happening. And then at some point the child is born and you don't have control over it anymore. It's like, they're their own person. They're like doing their own thing. And books are kind of similar in that it's like, at some point, like, I'm in control of it in the sense that I'm writing it. And I am, like, making choices and decisions about what I'm doing. And then at some point that book is out in the world and, like, doesn't really have anything to do with me anymore. Like, it's like how people receive it. And, like, that's true of all books. But I think with the memoir, where it's, like, so personal, it was hard for me to, like, adjust immediately to this idea that, like, oh, this is actually, like, not in my control anymore. And how people receive it has nothing to do with me, and actually, like, is very personal and whatever. And so I feel like I've more or less managed to kind of, like, let it go. To me, the memoir feels like this moment in my career, this moment in my life that I got to kind of say what I needed to say about this thing. And then the new book is fiction, but it does also have me saying some other things. Like, the first book in the collection is about a writer on tour for her memoir. So I'm, like, thinking about sort of, like, a little bit of, like, a metafictional narrative about, like, what it means to also, like, be sort of in public talking about this sort of thing. I don't think of myself as a memoirist. Like, some people, like, that is their discipline. And, like, I am a fiction writer who happened to write a memoir. But it also is the book of mine that is most known. Like, way more people have read the memoir than I've read my first book. But it's like, whatever. I wrote it. I'm proud of the book I wrote. It's like an intense child that I had that, you know, shows up so often. It is like, I need to do my laundry and I'm like, hey, good to see you. Or maybe they're an adult now. I guess I don't know. I don't know. The metaphor kind of breaks down, but.
You wrote about having a sixth sense now for toxicity.
I was just telling my therapist about this the other day while I was, like, saying, yeah, I feel like this is like, it's a blessing and a curse. Cause, like, I definitely meet people and get, like, a vibe, and it's really hard when no one else can read it or no one else knows what I'm talking about. And so there've been a lot of situations where I've been, like, feeling a little standoffish about somebody, like a friend's new partner or a friend of a friend who I meet them, and I'm like, and then I feel like I'm almost always proven correct. And so I feel like, then I feel kind of vindicated. So I'm like, okay, my instincts are on the nose. Like, there's something about this person that was giving me, like, an unsettling feeling. And I think it's just, like, now I just have this, like, I mean, partially probably a trauma response, but also, like, this instinct that I've learned, which is, like, how do you know when you're being sort of manipulated in a conversation? How do you know when the person you're talking to is, like, not telling you the truth? Like, there's just these ways that I feel like I can, or, like, there's something about them that, like, makes me just feel a little bit, like, on edge. And luckily, it's like now I actually get to, like, honor those instincts. And it can be really helpful. It's really gotten me out of some, I think, sticky situations, or, like, helped me avoid certain situations that would have been otherwise not good.
Thanks for listening to Cruising. If you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. It really helps others discover our podcast. Cruising is produced by a small but mighty team of 3 queer women, Rachel Karp, Jen McGinnity, and me, your host and editor, Sarah Gabrielli. Our theme song is by Joey Freeman. You can support us at buymeacoffee.com/cruisingpod. Follow us on social media at cruisingpod, on Substack, cruisingpod.substack.com, and at our website, www.cruisingpod.com.
There are names that echo in the world of true crime, names that carry unanswered questions. Oakley Carlson, a 5-year-old girl who deserved safety, protection, and love, yet the system built to protect her failed, and Oakley disappeared. Her community still calls her name.
Or Ellen Greenberg, found in her locked apartment with 20 stab wounds, a case declared a suicide. But how does a locked apartment tell 2 different stories at once?
These are not just cases we have covered. They are people. They were loved, and they mattered.
Their stories deserve to be told with care, with depth, with truth.
I'm Ashley.
And I'm Ricky.
We are the husband and wife duo behind Crime Salad.
Every week we uncover stories of the missing, the silenced, the misunderstood. We ask the questions that were left behind. We refuse to let these stories be forgotten.
Because behind every case is a family holding on, a community seeking answers, and a story that deserves to be heard.
We invite you to listen to Crime Salad,
your healthy portion of true crime, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Tom.
Okay, so you want to tell him, or you want me to tell him?
No. I got this. I want people out there.
Yeah.
People, lean in. Get close. Listen, here's the deal.
We have big news.
We got monumental news. We got snacktacular news.
Yeah, after a brief hiatus, my good friend Michael Ian Black and I are coming back.
My good friend Tom Cavanaugh and I are coming back to do what we do best.
What we were put on this earth to do.
To pick a snack.
To eat a snack.
And to rate a snack.
Scientifically.
Emotionally.
Spiritually.
Mates is back.
Mike and Tom Eat Snacks is back.
A podcast for anyone with a mouth.
With a mouth. Available wherever you get your podcasts.